I completed both of my reference interviews at the Downers Grove Public Library, and I chose this library because it's a large library. It's much larger than my home library, and it's also a member of SWAN, so I knew I'd be able to use my Westmont library card. The reference desk at this library is located front and center of the adult section, and I was greeted by the reference librarian at the desk before I had even walked all the way up to the desk, and that put me at ease right away and it made me feel really comfortable. So what was my question? Can you help me find sources about influential women in popular music from 1950 through the present? And what information was I hoping to get? I wanted to find specific examples of how female music artists contributed to the development of popular music during their careers. I did my face-to-face reference interview first, and I thought the reference librarian did a great job going through all the steps of the reference interview. Some of the things that I thought were most helpful during the face-to-face reference interview were that this format allowed for quick conversation between the reference librarian and myself. The reference librarian was able to physically walk with me in the library and show me where things were located. The reference librarian was able to pull books, and I was able to look at them and give her feedback on letting her know whether or not I felt like they matched what I was looking for. The resources in the library, especially the reference resources that can be checked out, were accessible to me right away. And a shared interest in music established rapport and trust between me and the librarian. Even though it was a great reference interview, there were some drawbacks. I had to physically go into the library. Even though I got a few sources to take with me, I also had to request quite a few books, which means I'll have to make a second trip back to the library to pick them up. I felt like the librarian didn't take advantage of a teachable moment during our reference interview to show me how to use the library databases. She only gave me print sources to take home. And the librarian also seemed like she felt a little bit rushed looking for sources since I was physically standing there waiting for her. My chat reference interview also went really well. I got some good information, and I thought the librarian did a good job going through all the steps of the reference interview. Some of the things I thought were most helpful about this format is that I had time to formulate my thoughts and questions so I could clearly articulate what I needed. The librarian seemed more at ease taking his or her time looking for sources. He or she would suggest some sources and then go back and look again for some more things based on my feedback. It was really helpful being able to ask the question from home. I was actually doing a few other things while I was waiting for the librarian to come back with some answers. And this format also made it really easy to get electronic sources. I gave the librarian my email address, and he or she was sending articles directly to me. So some of the drawbacks of the live chat reference interview. There was a lot of wait time in between our chat interactions. After about 10 minutes of the reference interview, the librarian I was talking to needed to go home. Another librarian took over, but it did take some time. We had to go back through some of the interview steps, and it just took longer being a chat conversation. The reference librarian wasn't able to show me where any resources were physically located in the library. Again, it was suggested I look in the reference encyclopedias, but all the librarian could do was describe to me where they were located. And I felt like the lack of face time in the chat interview made it harder to establish the rapport and trust that I had in my face-to-face interview. So which one did I prefer? The face-to-face interview, which really surprised me. Some of the things that I thought were inherent advantages to the face-to-face interview. Again, the trust and rapport and the ability for the librarian to get a feel for the patron, which I think can be a great guide in selecting sources. I also think the immediate communication and feedback is a huge advantage. Having all of the resources in the library immediately accessible to the patron is helpful. And this format gives a lot more opportunity for the librarian to engage the patron in teachable moments. An inherent disadvantage to this format is that if the library is busy, it might be a little more difficult for the reference librarian to give as much time to a patron's question as he or she might like, especially if the patron doesn't have time to stay at the library and wait. So what about the chat reference interview? Inherent advantages here are that I thought it was much easier to share and access electronic sources. It allows more time for the librarian to search since the patron's at home, as long as the patron has the time to wait. This is a great way for homebound patrons to access and connect with their library. Some of the inherent disadvantages here are that some materials can only be accessed by visiting the library. Again, that personalization, trust, and rapport, I think, is lost in chat reference. This also isn't an ideal option if a patron needs quick reference service. So, I thought both of my interviews were successful. I ended up getting a lot of sources, including books on the history of popular music, books on women in music, several articles, some biographies, and I also looked through the music encyclopedias at the library. The service I received was friendly, professional, helpful, knowledgeable, and enthusiastic, and I would definitely go back to this library in the future for other reference needs.